Hi, everybody, and welcome to Figma for EDU's monthly workshop series where we cover various topics regarding Figma and Figma for Education. Today's agenda, we're going to be talking about enabling and using dev mode. We're going to talk about sort of navigating and working in this space. If you're a designer, I think it's really helpful for you to understand what it is that the developer sees and what it is that they may need. And when I'm talking about developers, I'm talking about folks that are going to be making your designs into iOS apps, Android apps, and or using them for web development. So making like mobile web applications or mobile web websites. Mobile web websites. That's a funny word. Okay, so we're going to be talking about how you mark things ready for development. We're going to talk about annotating and measuring out objects for design. So, how are you going to communicate your intention of your design to a developer, as well as using code snippets and units and comparing changes. So, dev mode is going to be a space for developers to work, but it's also just going to be that collaborative space where designers can mark their intentions and can understand how best to communicate what they want built with a developer. So we don't think of it as a handoff, we think of it as a handshake. Now, in this file, I do have a link to the dev mode playground. When I click on that, you will see there's an entire community file dedicated to the various details of dev mode. I'm going to be covering a lot of the topics here, but in a more sort of interactive question and answer sort of scenario. But if you do want another reference for many of the dev mode features, you can go over and get a copy of the dev mode playground. All right. So that being said, what I'm going to do before I even begin, I'm going to switch my whole interface into dark mode since it is common that developers would rather not be in light mode, but in dark mode. So I'm going to show you how to do that. I'm going to click on my canvas here and I'm going to pull up the quick actions menu. So if you've been to some of my workshops before, you're familiar with this shortcut, Command P or Command/. If you're on Windows, it's going to be Control P or Control/. The reason I'm saying Control P is that's a little bit more accessible for those of you who might not have a US keyboard. So Command P or Control P. It's going to bring up this little menu right here. And I'm going to type in Use Dark Mode. And when I type that in, you'll notice that the UI goes a little bit darker. And that's so when I come down here to my next page, you'll see over here on the left, there's pages, there's intro, there's basic example. This basic example page, the background has already been set a little bit darker. The reason is folks like the contrast a little bit easier on their eyes. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to zoom in here to this dev mode page. One fun thing that you may not know about Figma, when you're working on the canvas here, you can see the layers. If you double click on any layer icon, it'll take you right to that page. So when you're navigating a page and you're like, oh, I don't quite know where to begin, or I don't know, I'm not as comfortable zooming around, I'm just going to double click on that. It's going to take me right to where I want to be. So we're going to talk about dev mode. I'm going to introduce you to the concept really quick. Like I mentioned before, it's a way for you to inspect your designs. So when you're in the design panel, you are editing things on the design canvas. When you're in dev mode, you are inspecting and viewing and looking a little beyond that in a way that's more meaningful when you go to develop that. So if you'll notice in my top right corner, I have a dev mode icon. However, it's telling me that I can't use it right now because this file is currently in my drafts. I need to move it to a paid team. And it doesn't need to be a paid team. It could be that free education team. I'm going to show you how to do that. So I could do it right here by going move file. And it's going to tell me where am I going to place this. I have my workshop team right there. I can click on it. It's going to move that file, and that file is now there. Now, if you really want to see physically where that's being moved from and to, I can show you that really quickly. I'm going to click my top left corner, I'm going to go back to my files. And here you can see this is my draft space. You can see I have a bunch of random files there. But then down here, I have my education team, right? And in my education team, there's a project, and this is where the file currently is. So if I was to drag it back to my drafts, right? It's in my drafts, and that's not a collaborative space. And that's not a space that has the enabled feature of dev mode, other features as well, such as advanced prototyping or audio chat in Figma, right? The features are going to be in the education team. So I'm just going to take that same file, I'm going to drop it over into this project, and now I'm going to re-enter it. And now that I'm in it again, you can see this is exactly where that file is. So, and now when I go to the top right corner, I can enable dev mode. So at this moment, I'm going to click back over to my pages. So someone's asking, do we have to do this? So you don't have to do this right off the bat. I'm performing this for the workshop. So then this way you can kind of see where these things are. Okay, so once again, I'm in the file, and this is the test file or the starter file that I provided you all. And I'm just going to walk you through some of the concepts here. So here's this first slide. Shift D is going to take us from design to dev mode. So while I'm in design mode, I can draw rectangles, I can add text, and I'm going to be making my designs. When I'm in dev mode, I'm going to be inspecting those designs. So then that way they can be developed into a mobile application or a web application. So when I hop over here to the right, now I'm in dev mode and I see a different version of these things. So when I click on this rectangle, I no longer am able to edit the rectangle. I'm instead inspecting the rectangle and I see its various properties. So I could see its width, I could see its height, I could see its background color, and I can see these other things. When I click on the text, I can now see code that's related to this text for CSS. CSS being the language that allows you to style text for websites. Okay, so here, let me jump out of dev mode. So these are things I'm placing on the canvas. So when I'm in design mode, I'm able to change properties. I can change that color. I could change the font of this text to a different font. And then when I swap over into dev mode or development mode, when I select this, you will see that the code for this has then changed. It's been updated. And I can even copy the text that is here. So in a nutshell, that is its dev mode in its simplistic form. Once again, I want to make sure that y'all know dev mode is free for education. You must be a education verified user. The file must be on an education team. And if you want to give others dev mode access that is only that they only see dev mode, what you want to do is enable them only as a user. So that's a collaboration bit right there. So when you go to share this with another person and you only want them to see your file as a developer, what you want to do is just give them view access, not edit access. Anybody who is just a viewer on the file will be able to see the file as a dev mode within dev mode only, so they can inspect it. All right, so let's get into a little bit more of the nuts and bolts of things. So I know some of you are beginners to Figma. So you are kind of wondering, how do we go from just drawing simple squares and shapes to making them something that can be developed into an app or a website? So what the designer is doing is basically kind of rendering intent of what it is that they choose to build. So for today's example, I'm going to be focusing on this concept of a UI card, right? So you might be familiar with little cards that you might see. Let's say like an Instagram card, like an Instagram photo will show an image, and then there's some text underneath it. Sometimes you might go to a shopping website where you'll see a product. There's a photo of the product, there's a title, and then you can have like an add to cart button. So a common UI component is going to be a UI card. So we're going to use that as kind of like our grounding example for how you might construct a UI card, and then how a developer can inspect it or view it for building it out on either a like web platform or a mobile app platform. So if we look at this card, I'm just going to take a copy. I'm going to move it over here, right? What we're looking at is a shape, right? So this can be a shape or a frame. The shapes you'll see are in the top left, right? You pull up a shape tool, we draw a rectangle. The text that's included here, you have the text tool, you press T, you can add some text here. This would be my headline. I can change the properties of this text by selecting that text field, then coming over here to the right, I could change that font. Let's say I want to find popular fonts. Let's say I'm going to choose this Anonymous Pro. I can change the font size. So I could bring that down in size. And I can change other aspects such as the letter spacing. I can make that a little bit tighter or open that up. And then like I can add in other bits too. So if I draw in another text field and I want to add in some body text, so I could say, hello, how are you today? I am demoing dev mode. I can select that text, make that a little bit smaller. We're going to lower the hierarchy of that text. We're going to change the line height of that as well. So I'm going to bring that down, right? So we're kind of building out this card bit by bit. And then we can also add like a button. So these are going to be the different pieces. So we have a shape or frame, which can then serve as a container for an image. So if you've came or visited my previous workshops, you can see how we could turn a shape into an image. So let's say if I was to take this rectangle and I come up here to the top left, and here I can go to File, Place Image or Video. Let me make my UI just a little bit bigger for some of you in the back so you can see a little bit better. So once again, I can select this and I can go place image or video. It's going to prompt me to grab an image from my file browser, and I can populate that shape with an image, right? So once we're working with images, we're working with text, then we can begin to build out other aspects of this card. So when I select these two here, I can make it into what we refer to as auto layout. So I have entire workshops on auto layout. What auto layout does is it's going to create a frame around these objects, and it's going to keep these objects sorted and spaced out, and I'm going to have the ability to create a background around them. So here I just have 1, 2, 3 objects. I'm going to select them. I'm going to press Shift A. And now that I've pressed Shift A, I have some properties over here on the right design panel that's referred to as auto layout. I can adjust the alignment. I can give it a background color fill. So let's say I'm going to make this like a little blue card, and then I can give it some padding on the left, right? And left and right and the top and bottom. So, that is essentially how you can construct the basics of the card. And now that this has been constructed, when you're working with the developer needs to think about how they're going to construct the same concept in code. So when I select this frame, when I go into dev mode just to try this out, I can see how this is all being placed out. And you might be saying too, like, why does that say 1 and 0.69? It's going to be a concept we're going to talk about in a little bit, but basically you can change how the units are showing up for that spacing. And here you might even say, well, why does it say spacer 4? It's using variables, and I'll explain how that works. But you'll see here that there's this 11 spacing. And so if I want to change, any of those spacing values, I can begin to adjust them there on the canvas and make adjustments to my design. And then we're going to articulate them to the developer. But I just wanted to take a moment so you can know, what is behind the making of a card, where we have these different components and we're using a special type of frame to keep it together. So in this file, I have a number of things that are referred to as components. Components are objects that are essentially reusable. So in a design system, when you're working with a team of other people, they build out these components so they can be reused again and again. It's the same way that a developer will make a component that is then deployed in code. They're not making each individual page, they're defining the core concept that then populates their pages. They're coding them. So when I build this component and I make edits or changes, you see those reflected in its instances. However, you can still make changes on the instances that can differ themselves from the main component. So the main component is like a definition, and then the instances, we can then go and then add to that definition. So I can put in a title here, right? So for this card headline, I could say, this is a card instance, it behaves differently. I behave differently. And I can show you how to build those out. We have other workshops where we deep dive into building of components. So if you want to dig in a little bit more there, but basically what I want you to see here is that there's changes. This is going to be something that we're going to reference in a little bit, but I want to just kind of show you how that can be kind of adjusted and changed up. All right, I'm going to delete those. Here you can see we have some buttons. We have these various pieces that are used to build up our system. I mentioned really quickly, I'll cover just how to build a simple component. If I put in a bit of text here, so I'm going to call this button label. I can select that button label, press Shift A. That's going to place an auto layout frame around that text field. I can give it a fill color. And if I type in more text, it will grow to fill that text. And that auto layout frame will give me the ability to define padding. So I can set 16 pixel padding, 16 pixel padding. I can change that to button label. I can select the frame and I can round out those corners, right? So that would be the building of this. Now, let's say I want to reuse this button again and again. When I click up here to create component, this has now been created as a main component that can be used again and again. I'm going to double click on that and say button example. Now, what's fancy about this, I'm just going to say it's fancy, is that I can go over here to my assets panel and I can find that object and I can just drag it in. So the way that folks are working is they'd make these definitions and then other folks can use that same thing and then they can apply their overrides to customize it to make it look different. They can add the content. So I can call this button start here. I can change this button to portfolio, and you'll see that that auto layout frame is going to allow the frame to grow and contract based on the text field that's inside. And so once again, this is important because we can set values here. I can set like 15, 15. I could set like a spacer value of 0. And when I go into dev mode, right, those values will then be surfaced to that developer. So when they want to see that text and the way that the designer intended for that text to be displayed, all of those properties can now be surfaced to the developer. So someone was asking a question about the diamond. So when there are 4 diamonds, right, that denotes the main component. That's the component that's here in the library. That's the initial definition. Now, if I were to duplicate this or make a copy of it, drag another instance, you will notice in the layers panel, there's an open diamond. And that open diamond signifies that it's an instance and that there's a main component out there that is providing its definition. So when you're working in Figma, you're not just making a thing once and then making it over and over again. You make it a definition of a single object, then you make its copies, its instances, and then you customize them and adjust them. So we have a whole concept of auto layout, but really quickly to understand the concept, when you have multiple objects and you want to create a relationship of them, you wrap them into an auto layout frame. So if I was to select these three, you'll even notice that this one's slightly off. When I press Shift A, an auto layout frame gets added around all three of those objects, and it gives me additional properties such as spacing that I can keep between those. And then it gives me some padding around both of those. So one of the core kind of tenets of auto layout is it behaves very similar to how you might develop in code this sort of list of objects, right? So if I was to select this and go into dev mode, I will note here within CSS that it says display inline flex and flex direction. So it's mimicking Flexbox model, which is a CSS model for arranging objects inside of a container. So let's just hop out of that. I'm going to delete this. But here, these components are important because they allow you some semblance of control. And they allow you to define or redefine something at its core and then update it later. And one of the other reasons it's really important is that it has a place in dev mode where it allows the developer to better understand how to construct it and how it will live with other content in it. So I'm going to head on over here where I have some examples. I have a section here in Figma. Let me move these down. I'm going to move these down to the left. Here we go. So I have here a section Figma with a couple of different layouts. Now, these layouts are constructed with frames. So I'm going to press the F key. I'm going to draw a frame. When I draw a frame, you'll notice over here in the right design panel, I can choose a device type. So I can choose like an iPhone 14 Max. I can take one of those assets that I've built, one of those card assets, and I can drop it in and I can begin to build out the interface using these pre-constructed components. So I make that once and then I can begin to define this. If the device was a little bit wider, one of the benefits of auto layout is allowing tech content to flex and grow at various levels. So we're going to stick with that iPhone 14 frame. And so this frame is then going to kind of serve as our kind of like preview for that, right? So what I'm demonstrating here is how you're going to have different layouts where you might have a mobile layout, you might have a tablet layout, and a desktop layout. And within here, I have that component. And when I go into dev mode, there is this playground for components. And this is something that I wanted to talk about. So, what I would highly recommend is if you're unfamiliar with the creation of components, we recently did a workshop called Auto Layout Components, where we dig deep into the building of those components and what it means to build components and maintain a library. So then this way, when you're designing with others, they're building on top of the existing designs and there's going to be consistency across a design team. When I click on this component within this design, I can open it in a little component playground that allows me to try some of the different features. So I could turn on and off the image. I can remove one of these buttons and I can begin to edit the text. So as a developer, what I'm doing is I'm testing this card and I'm getting a much better sense of it. So these buttons down here, let's say I need to make them into a more meaningful button. I can change that button text. So I can change the state to a normal state, and I can change that text to be, click, say click here. And I can take the second button, I can put it into a disabled state, and I can say, don't click here, right? And it allows me to see this in that way. So does it have any option to get code to build it in React? So the there's going to be a number of different frameworks that you can use. So there's plugins within dev mode as well. I'll cover this in just a little bit. We have kind of like a native one called Code Snippet Editor. So then this way you can kind of maintain a relationship and your own code snippets that you're going to be working with in the components. I have a little instance here in VS Code to show you how to open a Figma file in VS Code, but we'll be covering that in just a little bit. And what VS Code is going to be an editor that a developer may be using to develop that React code. So here, as I'm going along, I've already kind of demonstrated that in selecting this object, I can begin to see some of those properties associated with it. I can change the code generation language. So I can actually change it up to Swift UI, and I can see it. So if you're doing iPhone app development, you can see the properties of the design in Swift UI. Or I can switch this into Android, and I can begin to see those here as well on how those pieces are working, right? And the purpose of this is not that you're just going to push a button and you're going to get all of this code miraculously done for you. The purpose of this is so that way when you're working with a developer in like a team space, for them to see what they want to see, and that way they can better understand the designer's intent. So this is a collaboration tool, and it's going to provide some code, but it's not giving you a full like just finished output. It's not going to be full code gen where you have a finished product just by designing it. The purpose is to design and collaborate with the developers in the way that they want to see and inspect the work. So I'm going to show you a few more things here. Um, you'll notice that as you're working, right, in Figma, we have these things called sections. So under the frame, you'll see a section. The shortcut key for that is Shift S. And we've already seen sections. It's a way for you to group elements and organize them together. So if I was to be working on something new, like I can say, riffing on a design, and I could change the background color of that section so I can just kind of see that a little bit more. And I can go to, let's say, my assets here. Where am I? There you go, my UI card. And I can bring in like my UI card, and I'm going to be making some changes to it. So I can begin to kind of like work on those here. So once again, the distinction of design and developer mode is in design mode, you are able to edit and manipulate objects on the canvas. When you're in design mode, you are just being able to kind of like inspect and see them. So if I'm riffing on a design here, I can have a section, and let's say I would like to share this with the developer. I would like to intentionally mark this as ready for development. When I click up here, you can see mark ready for dev, and then it's ready for dev. So when I close out of here and I go back to my layers, any page that has things that are ready for development will be denoted by that little icon right there, right? And you can see on this page, there's several things that are ready for development. Now, when we switch into dev mode, what the developer sees is they see over here just the things that have been marked ready for development by the developer. So here, if I'm going to go down to annotations, I can click on annotations. It's going to take me to that whole section. That riffing on a design is going to take me to that whole section. I can go down to compare changes, right? And I can see that whole section. I'm going to head on over to my annotations. And once again, anything that you want to just highlight and send directly to the developer, this is what's going to get it front and center with Ready for Dev. Now, that can also be marked on just like one specific object. So if I have a UI card here, I can mark that as ready for development, and then it'll show up over here in this panel and I can navigate to it more easily. So it allows me to see just what I want to see as the developer. So here in Ready for Dev, you'll notice that this particular design is making use of annotations and measurements. So you can see that we have a bunch of measurements here. So as a designer in this file, what you can do is begin to mark up your designs so folks can understand what it is that you see. The problem used to be that designers, we would make these designs, hand it over to a developer, and it's like, don't you see what I see? Didn't you get my spacing just right, just the way that I did it? Right. And the developer were like, no, like we understand things on different terms. So when you are annotating or creating measurements for your designs, you are highlighting the aspects of the design that you are intentionally wanting to share with that developer. So I'll show you right here on this particular object. I am currently in dev mode as a designer. So you'll see I'll turn that on. And if I want to create new measurements, I'm going to click up here. I'm going to click measure. You can also press Shift M and you can select any 2 points and you can begin to draw those out. Now, if you want to delete one of those, right, just select it, press delete. And this will give you the ability to space things out. Now, you might say, that when you turn that off, like the developer can still see, they can see this spacing, they can see this padding, but you can highlight things that are really important that might not be being caught by the design. So let's say if I go back into that mode and I want to highlight the spacing between, the image and that first box for that text field. Let's say I want to make sure that the bottom of that paragraph is spaced accordingly to the bottom of that card. So anything that you want to be super intentional about, you can use this as the opportunity to define those things. One thing that's really fun is that they all snap. So as I drag this over, these will snap so I can create a much more sound and organized, measurements of the files. So there we go. I'm able to adjust these all up. Now, when we're talking about annotations, same thing here. This is the annotations button. Let me make that just a smidge bigger. The annotations is going to give me the opportunity to demonstrate what it is that I see and what it is that I care about. Now I can click on this and I can add an annotation and I can use markdown text to highlight things that are important to me. So I can, let's say I'm going to type in, paragraph text and I can bold that. I can press shift return and I can say, let me unbold this. This is super important because of reasons. Please be sure to not let this exceed, 4 lines in total, right? So I can add in that annotation and I can begin to add in other properties that I deem important. So let me decrease the size of my interface there for a moment. So here, when I click on the annotation, I can add in additional properties. So I can say, all right, we have our text style, we have our font style, we have our font, we have the font size, we have the line height, and we have that weight. So these are the properties are going to be auto annotated for me. So even here, I can click here and then I can put in H1 I can bold that, and I can give specific instruction that I want to relay to the developer regarding, anything that can be specifically intentional here, like, must not exceed one line. All right, so must, let me unbold that, Command B, must not exceed, one line total. And then I can begin to add in those properties. So we have semi-bold, the font is enter, the font size is 24, the line height is 28, and the weight is 600. And what's cool about the annotations is that they will become available at like the right zoom level. I can kind of move that out, and they're going to exist and persist with the design. So a few other things too. When I select this object, if I decide that I'm going to be changing certain properties, so here actually I'm going to extend the size of this section here. I'm going to put in, like, let's say 2 objects. I'm going to press Shift A. It's going to put them into an auto layout frame. Let's add in like 18 padding on both sides. Let's give that a fill of like a blue color. And if I go to annotate this in dev mode, so if I'm going to create an annotation or a measurement, so let's create that measurement. You'll see that 18, right? Create that measurement. You'll see that 18. And I'm setting these values. When I go to update the design as a designer, right, I'm making these changes, right? And upon making those changes, they will automatically be reflected. So it's always adjusting those values. So yes, auto layout in many ways is similar to Flexbox. Auto layout will generate Flexbox code. There's some things that are slightly different. You can apply objects that have like absolute positioning within the Flexbox. So depending on the behavior that you're setting it up, it should be spitting out that code. So if I head on over to CSS, you'll see that this object display inline flex and the padding that I've associated with it. Cool. So you can see here, I can see all of those values set. And just as I mentioned, by making any changes to the design, so like here, I'm adjusting the padding and I'm adjusting this, those measurements are going to stay updated. So if you're a designer, this will help you understand like your consistencies. It'll help you look through your design and see if everything is as expected. So you might be like, oh wow, I totally did not expect for these values to show up. Maybe I need to go back and make some changes in my design, so then this way my design is more consistent as I'm moving through it. Okay, so once again, those are annotations. So being able to see annotations when you're in design mode, you can see that I understand that there's 4 here, or on this button label. When I click on it, it's going to prompt me to view those annotations in dev mode. And then here I can see everything the way that it's set up. And I'm going to explain the spacers and the color in just a moment. Okay, so before I do, over here we have we have our other section, right? And we have some objects here. I want to note that both of these components are from the same base component. These are both the UI card, but you'll notice that there's some differences in color, there's differences in width, there's difference in that image. So in dev mode, you can use dev mode to compare changes or to compare different objects. So here, what I can do is I'm going to hop into dev mode again, and I'm going to select both of these objects, this UI card and, oh, here we go. Yep, I'm going to select them both, and it says 2 selected. I'm going to go to compare changes, and the compare changes dialog is going to allow me to see the difference in properties or the difference in change between those two objects. So imagine if you're like riffing on a design, or you're looking at two different things, or you're updating a design, right? You can then see those changes over time. So I can actually come up here and go to properties and see the difference based on what it is that I'm selecting. So if I select flamingo, I can see that that content is changed from hummingbird to flamingo, right? I can see that that color has changed. I can see that the size has changed. So this also works with kind of like the history, like the legacy of that given object. So here I can see that this has been edited 24 minutes ago, and now I can compare changes with the previous versions. So in looking at this, I could see the difference from when the frame was created. There's actually not much difference. So if I go ahead and I start to make a bit of difference, wherein let's say I make that text much larger, let's increase that line height. Let's say I override this text, right? So let's say I'm going to make that text a little bit bigger. I'm going to open up its line height as well. And I'm making these changes, on this object here. And so let's say I go back into dev mode and it's edited a few seconds ago. Let's compare changes with the previous versions. And now I can visually see the differences as they've been changed. So they're highlighted here. I can click on them. And if you are a developer, then this visual language is going to be familiar to you. It's going to show you that visual diff between those objects. So here I see the 24. And if I want to, this is a side by side, I can also do an overlay where I can visually see them on top of each other, what those differences are. So I can go side by side, I can go to overlay, and then I can cross fade the difference between that previous version and the new version. So at any different point in time, and I'm so sorry, Jason, I know, like overriding that I mean, one step worse is if I was to exit dev mode and then I was to push changes to the main component, uh, then that would take everything and just undo it all. You could only do that if the main component is in the same file as the instance, FYI. All right. So, one of the things that you really want to just consider here is just that these are the things that the developer sees, and just to be aware of some of what it's there. Now, dev mode is constantly in development, so I saw all of y'all asking about like more questions and like further development. So we're just going to continue to make this tool better. Once again, I'm in dev mode. I mentioned that compare changes. Just want to highlight that you can select multiple objects. You can compare iterations. You can compare riffs, or you can compare something, against its own history. Want to identify here the open in playground. So when I open this in this component playground, right, I can access various properties that have been defined by the person who created that component. I can even change the variable mode. So if you have modes applied to the card, I can apply all of those, and I can then also reset those properties. Or if I want to see where that component was defined, I can click on that and it's going to go to that main component. So then that way, as a developer, I can see what it is that's there. So there's a lot here to unpack in terms of what the developer can see, wherein I could see, okay, what has been edited and when, easily being able to navigate to those elements, being able to kind of play around with that design in a playground. And the one thing too that I want to highlight here is in working with those components, I mentioned there here in the assets panel, this UI card, and this is a benefit of being on the education team or having a paid team, is that when you click on it, before you even insert it, you're given a playground to set the card up. So if I wanted to pre-populate it with content, here I could change some of that body text or that headline. I could say Figma for EDU. I could type in, let's say I don't even want to show that secondary bit, right? I can like hide it or just place it in. And then once this is ready, I can insert that instance, and then it shows up. Clearly, I did something wrong here because I should want that to collapse, but that's fine. All right. I mentioned one other thing about the variables. So in this file, the text is defined as styles. So we have here styles for that text that can be reused. So there's a definition that the developer will be reading for consistency in that file. And just like this too with colors, colors are assigned as variables. So sometimes this is brought in as a library, but when I click on the canvas, I come over here, there is the definition of those spacer values. That's values that can be applied for the padding, and there's definition for those colors, and the colors are assigned. These are all aliased color values. Once again, if you want to check out my workshop on variables and mode, I will discuss these in much more in depth. You could find that on the Figma for EDU playlist. But essentially, these objects exist to give you more consistency as a designer when you're developing. So if I was to draw this rectangle and I want to use my design system mandated color, or just the color that I chose as for my brand, I can pick from those values here. Now, these have all been defined with values that are specific to their form and their function. So this color here is button main, and it's pulling from the blue that is defined there in the system. And then here I can add in text, or let me add in another object. Let's like say I'm making a little wireframe here. I'm going to space them out and put them into an auto layout frame, Shift A, and apply some spacing. Let's say 80, or not 80. Let's go in here and apply my spacing value. So spacer 5 and spacer 5. And those values are now in here. Let's give it a fill. So when I'm in dev mode, I'm going to see that variable definition, that variable name. When I click on that color, that UI is using its variable name. So this is something that you can work with your developers to get consistency on your like design system for development. So I'm able to see the definition of that variable here alongside its actual color value. And this is going to be important for that developer. And once again, here I mentioned too that things can be expressed in terms of REM values. Those are real M values or root M values. And what it is, it's the base, it's a multiplier or a relative unit from the base value. For developers, it's important to work on those relative values for scaling and for accessibility. So these are things that you can alert your developers and be like, hey, they're seeing everything in pixels. If they would like to see them as REM values, you can go in here, you can adjust the unit settings, change that base REM value. So 1 REM equals 16 pixels. You could change that to be 24, and that means that every 24 pixels will then be evaluated as 1 REM. The most common default is going to be 16. And here there's an option. Let's say you don't want to apply that to spacing. You only want to apply it to text properties. You can turn that on right there. Now, when you work in other languages, there is a different understanding of units. So when you're working for Android, you'll see device independent pixels or the DP values, and you can use those to be surfaced to your developer. All right. So that being said, let's check on over to Q&A. I'm going to head on over to the layers. We have some questions here. So how developers can see the variables and all the token structure that I created. I know that there's like an API that you can kind of pull them out. You will be seeing them kind of like in context when you're looking at like CSS, like you're going to see it within the code gen definitions. There's a number of different plugins that you can use as well to kind of like highlight those. One thing that you do want to do is when you're working with your variables. So like, let's say, here, when you're working in those settings, you can um, add in code syntax right here. So you can kind of begin to change and edit those and surfacing them as well. So there, you'll notice that when you're working with the variables, you're going to see these options over here on the right. This will also allow you to just kind of like better scope variables when you're working on them. So you're not seeing like a full list of variables for every option. So always look into there. It'll give you the ability to like add descriptors. One other thing here too, when you're working on components, there's documentation links that you can add when you're building out those components in the same way. So possible to import this. I'm not quite sure. All right, here we go. When using annotations, we'll annotate spacing, color, etc. with variables. Yes. So annotating there, I know that when you're using the measurements right now are converting to the units that the developer wants to see. When they're looking at the base one, it will be set. Right now, I think annotations isn't performing that shift just quite yet. I'm actually going to check to see whether or not that was a bug, but I have noticed that they haven't yet updated that. So how does this work with videos? So when you're working with video, actually, that's a really good question. When you're working with any sort of image asset or video asset, so let's say if I was to bring up a video, let's see, I have just some random videos here. So when you apply a video and you go to inspect it in dev mode, let's say you as a developer, you want that asset, you can just click on it and it'll download. It'll give you the direct link to that asset. So if you're working with images as well, so let's say if I was head back to my basic examples here and I'm inspecting and I want that given image, I can click on this right here and it's going to provide me the link to that source image that's being used there. So that was a great question. Let me go back to my Q&A. How useful are plugins for Figma to convert design to code? Yeah, so you might want to check out the Replit plugin. There's a Storybook plugin. There's an Anima plugin. I know that folks are really all about the Anima plugin. This is going to be something you're going to start to see more and more with. One thing that I will kind of emphasize is that the Figma Code Gen plugin, the Code Snippets plugin, is going to give you the ability to kind of store custom code from the developer's point of view. So I know I didn't really touch on it too much, but even here, this is VS Code. VS Code has a Figma extension. So if you go to Visual Studio's marketplace, you'll find Figma for VS Code. So here, once you've installed that, it's actually like a full web browser that will allow you to begin to access those files in the same way that you access it in dev mode. I can click on a different page here. I can go to a given section that I'm working on. So let's say here, this UI card. And what's really cool is that you can actually pull up the various editors. So the code snippet editor can be used, and I don't actually have this currently set up, but it can be used to keep those snippets in line. So when you're working with other developers, they can associate those same snippets and you can kind of build this out. So I can go to snippets right here and I can associate snippets with the given object that I'm working with. So otherwise, you're working with a CSS gen, you're working with the existing ones, but you'll notice that more and more folks are kind of coming out with their own code gen plugins. They're going to work with their respective like libraries or platforms. Cool. Let's take one more. Can compare changes only be seen in dev mode? So compare changes right now, I believe, can only be seen in dev mode. The other instance of the compare changes interface is going to be in the organization mode of Figma when you're working with branches and branching and merging. So that isn't currently part of the education plan. So would it be fair to say that dev mode is mostly intended for component creation? I would say that dev mode, while I focused mostly on components, it can be used for complete layout. So in the same way that I've selected this layout, this isn't a component itself, but I can use it to highlight other aspects of it. So it would be like a completely driven layout. So here, let's say I go into dev mode, I can begin to like annotate all of the objects as a composite layout. So while I focused kind of mostly on component creation, that isn't the only answer. Does dev mode have a sort version control system? Um, so the version control system is going to be just like uh, the compare changes. So Figma itself, any object that you have, this is a relatively new file, so there isn't a long tail of like history within the design. But let's say I select this object, I go into dev mode. I can go within compare changes. I can see those previous versions. So then the updated versions are going to be here. So as this becomes more mature and there's more changes over time, um, I can kind of see that whole history show up here and kind of move through the various versions, excuse me, of that design. Cool. So thank you all so much. I really appreciate y'all. I know that this was going to be a little bit more technical. And I know that for some of you more technical, you probably wished it to be even more technical. It's going to be one of those fine balancing acts that we need to perform here. But I do want to thank you all. Alex is going to be sharing in the chat a link to a workshop and live stream feedback form. Let us know how we're doing. Also, let us know what you would like to learn more of. We run these workshops every month. We have different topics that we cover in Figma, FigJam, and collaboration platforms. Please let us know how you're doing. Was this helpful? And what we can do to better serve you. I really appreciate you all joining us today. Thanks for being in the chat. Thanks for being an amazing and wonderful crowd. And thank you, Alex, for all of the support.